Good evening, Kalispera, Kronya Pola, to our guests and to our friends and to the honorees, Your Excellency, Secretary. I don't know about you, but in watching the video of last year's events, I don't think there was a dry eye in the house, and I started feeling myself tearing up just watching that video. Who could forget both those moving speeches by our honoree and Vice President. I thought I would talk a little bit tonight to set the stage for our honorees, to explain a little bit about why Ochi Day and the bravery of the Greeks in World War II is an important message for those of us in the civilian world today that show the courage that you've exhibited. As His Excellency indicated, on October 28th, 77 years ago, the Italians launched a surprise attack on Greece from Albania after being told they could not traverse through Greek territory, the Prime Minister famously saying, "Ochi." The Greeks fought bravely and defeated the Italians. Now, those of you that are history buffs know the next part. You know that Hitler had to clean up the mess of his ally Mussolini, and the Nazis themselves invaded Yugoslavia and Greece roughly 6 months later. And in one of the great what-ifs of World War II history, many historians believe that the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, was delayed a few fateful weeks because of the need to get troops back up for that attack at the end of June. The Germans famously ended their offensive in front of Moscow in the snow and ice miles from the Kremlin. Had they had that extra 2 weeks, who knows what would have happened. But there's another more interesting aspect of what happened in 1940 and 41 that's sometimes forgotten, and that is the bravery of the civilians in Greece. Not only during the occupation, but during the attack itself, when the Germans invaded Crete by air in the first major airborne assault in modern times. Greeks famously, civilians, took whatever they could, pitchforks, I believe famously even muskets in the museum, and they defended the island. Yayas, teenagers, anybody. It was the first time that the civilians in World War II had in an organized way rose up against the invaders. And a German general famously said in his diary that this is not a good portent for us in the future. And it was that spirit that set Europe ablaze with resistance efforts everywhere afterwards in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia, and France, all inspired by the Yayas on Crete. So it's not just the soldiers that are heroes, it was civilians that were heroes. And I think that's an important aspect of why Ochi Day is so important and why we remember it. Because amongst our previous honorees, you should know that you're amongst presidents and vice presidents, princesses, Holocaust survivors, survivors of ISIS, the parents of the fallen, journalists, jailed dissidents, and I'm sure I'm missing a few. But I think you understand that in the spirit of Ochi Day, we admire your courage, we admire what you stand for, and what hopefully you represent in the fight against tyranny and oppression. And in this day in which, sadly, We are seeing more and more authoritarianism, more and more journalists and civilians being thrown in prison because of what they say or they think. Your courage is to be admired and celebrated tonight. Thank you for everything you do, and thank you all for your support that makes this possible.